This is Akashvani. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on climate justice, India's G20 leadership on global climate action. The participants are Mukul Sanwal, environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
The G20 summit in India is all set to commence this week in the national capital, Delhi. Summit will be held for 2 days and will be joined by representatives of the member as well as guest nations who will engage in discussions about diverse economic reform. India took over the presidency of the G20, the grouping of world's 20 biggest economies, which collectively account for 75 to 80% of the global emissions. In December 2022, at the transition of presidency from Indonesia to India, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji said the challenges of climate change, terrorism, and pandemics can be solved not by fighting each other, but only by acting together.
Yes, the Prime Minister made a very important distinction on the climate debate as well as to the G20 when he emphasized, and he continues to emphasize, the basic idea of one earth, one family, one future. What he's really saying is that it is not about environment or terrorism or any other issue. It is about the well-being of humanity, the individuals and society. Now that is a new approach to all these problems. So far we have been looking at them in isolation. Now he's trying to frame it differently, that we should focus on the human being and their well-being of each citizen throughout the world.
We have G20 meet under India's presidency assumes greater importance as we position as a front runner in the global climate agenda. We have seen our Prime Minister, attending the COP meetings at the different international environment organizations meet. And he talks about living up to the commitment to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. At the Glasgow summit, India set an ambitious target of achieving net zero emission by year 2070 and meeting 50% of its energy needs from renewable sources by 2030. These are the two targets which is not easy to achieve, but our Prime Minister has said that, and India is working very, very hard to achieve this. How important are these targets for combating climate change, and how is India doing?
See, the Prime Minister, in line with his distinction on the approach to climate change, he has urged within the United Nations and in the climate change treaty meetings about climate justice. He is basically saying that in the case of India, for example, our per capita emissions are just 2.5 tons carbon. United States is 12.4 in 2019. Despite that, and the large number of poor people in the country, he is saying that we will try to do our best. And in that, he has pointed out that renewable energy will form a significant portion of our energy needs by 2030. So what he's saying is, I'm not simply saying that I'm poor or my emissions are very low, but I'm going to do my best, and I'm showing you, I'm prepared for this to be measured by the international community, that a large percentage of my energy needs by 2030 will come from renewable energy sources. So he's not only saying that we need to have a new approach, climate justice is important, and that poor countries need to be given the room for development, but he's saying, I'm also prepared to do, and I'm going to do what best I can, and you can measure it. I think taken together, this is something very significant to which the developed countries do not have an answer, and other countries are following because they see this as an important way of reconciling development with environment.
Multilateral forums like the Group of 20, G20, what we call, play a crucial role in bolstering global collective action against the climate change. G20 gathers the world's most developed economies and emerging ones, which together account for more than 80% of the global GDP, 75% of the international trade, and 60% of the global population. So G20 economies are actually responsible for more than 2/3 of the global greenhouse gas emission. So all but one of the top 10 carbon emitting countries are G20 members. So India has a big challenge to convince these countries and to pave the roadmap for the future about mitigation. What do you see outcome from G20 on this account?
As you have rightly pointed out, the G20 are the major economies, but within them, there is a lot of difference. For example, the United States economy is larger than the economy of the other G6 countries. So out of the G7, United States economy is larger than the other six combined. Similarly, China's economy is larger than the developing countries' economies combined. But they are all sitting together. The Prime Minister is emphasizing the means of implementation. He is saying that those who have developed earlier have an obligation to help those who are developing now. And therefore, the means of implementation become important, and finance has been raised as an important issue. At the same time, India is saying not just about finance, but about change in lifestyles, climate justice, new way of looking at the climate change.
As you have rightly pointed out about the wealthy nations' reluctance to finance the global climate change initiatives, the G20 countries are home to many of the world's most significant carbon sinks, such as Brazilian Amazon rainforest, the Stuart marshes in the United Kingdom. And India's challenge as a G20 presidency is achieving the G20 climate goals, which includes the reluctancy on part of the wealthy nations to phase out fossil fuels and inadequate support to developing nations through climate finance. So can we see some sort of movement on this particular account? We have seen a lot of discussion happening on climate finance in the COP summits, but it never moves up. Can we see in G20 summit in Delhi some sort of progress on this front?
You see, the Prime Minister has been emphasizing, if you look at his statements very carefully, about how we should work towards the common goal. Not what has to be done by whom and when, but how it has to be done. And therefore, he has introduced this idea of lifestyle, which reflects consumption, which is essential for well-being. I think this is an important point that he has made, because the development trend throughout the world has been, as we shifted from agriculture to urban areas, because of better facilities, because of jobs, because of raise in incomes, the urbanization needed a lot of infrastructure. Infrastructure is basically steel, cement, and energy, electricity, oil for transportation. Now, what Prime Minister is saying is we can grow. We do not need to compromise levels of well-being, but we need to compromise or eliminate waste. For example, the shift India is making to the metro, rail transport, electric vehicles to phase out the use of oil. Now, some countries will phase out or reduce consumption of oil. Others will reduce consumption of coal. But essentially, the movement will be away from fossil fuels, and India is showing this path. Similarly, he's saying that, look, let us have vertical growth of countries which are not spread out. Maybe we don't need that much of transportation. He is bringing out a new way of dealing with climate change. There's a good possibility that over the next 2-3 years, some change will take place, because each presidency will reinforce what was not achieved here. And I'm sure they are working together. That is the part of the G20 process.
You spoke about the lifestyle of environment, which Prime Minister has been advocating. India's G20 leadership is based on the 5 pillars of Green Development Pact: lifestyle of environment, which we call popularly LIFE, circular economy, climate finance, accelerating progress on sustainable development goals, SDG what we call, and energy transition and energy security. All these pillars are needed to strengthen action towards energy transition. But to have a full-fledged climate response, more action is required. India, using its G20 presidency, will play a significant role in tackling climate change issues. So out of these 5 pillars, which one do you think there'll be trust in the upcoming G20 summit?
I think the thrust will be on a bit of everything, but basically countries are not prepared to commit to more than what they have already committed in the climate negotiations. But transport, I think, energy efficiency, there will be some shift, because that is a global shift. That is a global shift not only in India, but throughout the world, where the internal combustion engine is basically being phased out. France, Germany, India, China, even in the United States, Tesla. So what is happening is that this global trend is going to accelerate, and India is pushing it by showing its own example of encouraging people to shift from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles. And they have been very successful in India. There have been no complaints. There has been some standardization, and other countries are also following this path. So I think one clear change will be this. But the biggest change will come only when lifestyles change is adopted. And I think the Prime Minister continuously saying this in different fora, in different meetings, in different words. Vasudev Kutungakam, climate justice, looking at lifestyles. It amounts to the same big shift that once this is accepted by the world, then we can see that not only the growth of emissions, but the decline in emissions will be very sharp without compromising on lifestyles because waste will be eliminated. So far, the idea of waste has been industrial waste. We have not looked at how our individuals in their consumption patterns, in their lifestyles, in their daily life waste energy. For example, we don't switch off the electricity when we move out of a room. We don't switch off the fan. We keep the air conditioning very cold instead of a reasonable temperature. So all this will change once this new approach is accepted. And I feel that the Prime Minister is doing the right thing. He's not going to get success in a meeting, but if he keeps pushing this, something will definitely change.
Yeah, something is definitely going to change. One very important thing is there has been common goal around the world of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But sadly, the data from Climate Action Tracker, what is popularly known as CAT, shows that of the G20 countries, only UK has put in place climate action targets and policies that could help the global community achieve this goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Prior to the negotiations at COP27, which took place last year in Egypt, participating countries were expected to submit revised or updated targets with renewed pledges, but they have hardly delivered that. While 19 out of the 20 countries have updated their pledges, only 11 submitted targets that are stronger than previous ones. And these targets must be strengthened and suitable policies carefully planned and implemented to meet them. So when the Climate Ministers Conference took place along with this G20 summit in India, there was a unanimity about this challenge. Now the head of the states are coming, and this is climate change is one of the top agenda. Do you think there could be more progress made?
See, it is difficult to say because the negotiation is still going on. We do not know what the final communique will be. But one thing is clear, that the basic principle of the Paris Agreement, that instead of international law, we should base climate actions on national law, the national commitments, has not worked the way it was expected to work, because countries are not taking the national actions which they can be held accountable to under national law in the manner that it was envisaged. For example, even in the UK, there is right now a controversy as to UK opening up new oil fields, offshore oil fields, because that will lead to increase in emissions. All these forest fires that are taking place in Canada will increase emissions. So it is a situation that the world community tried a new approach. It is not quite working. And I come back to the idea of the Prime Minister that I think very soon the world will realize that you cannot rely upon law to make societal change, because climate change is basically a societal problem. It is our actions that have created the problem, and it is our actions that will solve the problem. Not technology, not regulation, not punishment. Just as any social change, a societal change is needed. And I think that is coming up, that is being recognized. It takes time, but it is being recognized as a different and new approach.
Let's hope that New Delhi summit of G20 proves a milestone in tackling the climate change, where the leaders come to a point where they realize the severity of the problem and they think about taking this challenge further. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on climate justice, India's G20 leadership on global climate action. The participants were Mukul Sanwal, environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.